5 Strange Mystery Stories. The Riverside Monster. Stories of strange and weird phenomena are, by their nature, filled with weird occurrences and odd coincidences. Therefore, it may come as no surprise when certain names of people and places seem to reappear over and over again when discussing these stories. For example, devil or its derivatives appear in countless locations where ghosts, goblins, and boogeymen have lurked. California has several devil locations, including Devil's Knoll, Devil's Gate Reservoir, Mount Diablo, and Devil's Hole. One such name is Wetzel. In 1958, 2 completely different Charles Wetzel saw 2 completely different creatures in 2 completely different locations. The 2 had never met, were not related to each other, and, ironically, both also had sons named Charles. According to Weirdca.com, on Saturday, November 8, 1958, Charles Wetzel was near Riverside, California when he encountered a strange bipedal, reptilian-like creature. He was driving on North Main Street and had arrived at the Santa Ana River, which had overflowed its banks when his radio station suddenly went out. Changing stations didn't help. Then a 6-foot-tall creature with scaly skin, no nose, no ears, fluorescent eyes, and a beak-like mouth emerged and attacked Wetzel's car. Wetzel later described it as having a round, scarecrowish head like something out of Halloween. It was further described as having scaly, leaf-like skin, 2 long spindly arms, and legs that grew out of its sides instead of from underneath its torso. As it clawed at his windshield, he stomped on the gas, causing the creature to fall off the hood and under his car. Not caring about the monster, he blatantly ran over it. The creature scraped against the bottom of the vehicle. Police tests would reveal that something had rubbed against his car's underside, but police dogs later brought to the area found nothing. The next night, another motorist was frightened by something not far from the site of the attack and reported to the police that something dark had attacked him near the area. But the only real evidence of the creature's existence was the clawed windshield of Charles Wetzel's car. Since then, except for the 1970s discovery of Bigfoot tracks in the area, the location has been relatively quiet. 18 years after the incident, 21-inch footprints believed to possibly belong to Bigfoot appeared in the Santa Ana River basin. The case is even more bizarre when one considers that on July 28 of the same year, another Charles Wetzel encountered what appeared to be a 6-foot-tall brown kangaroo in Nebraska. This Wetzel wasn't the only one who saw such a creature in the area. Other kangaroo sightings appeared around the same time, as far as 100 miles away. The sighting so profoundly affected Charles Wetzel that he named a beer for it at the brewery he operated, Wetzel Kangaroo Beer. So was Charles Wetzel's reptilian attacker a relative of the lizard people presumably living under Los Angeles? Or was it a real-life creature from the Black Lagoon? And what are we to make of the phenomenal coincidence of Charles Wetzel seeing a kangaroo in the same year, attacked by a flying witch? On January 16, 2004, at 3:15 a.m., Leonardo Samaniego, a police officer from Guadalupe, NL, Mexico, was attacked by a mysterious flying humanoid. Officer Samaniego had been making his usual patrol in his patrol car around Colonia Valles de la Sala when some large black object appeared to leap from a tree next to the street and turn to face the police car. Puzzled, Officer Samaniego turned his lights on high beam and saw a living nightmare. What had fallen or leaped from the tree was a woman dressed in black, who didn't really touch the street, she just floated several feet above the ground. As Samaniego's eyes widened in disbelief, the woman's 2 large black eyes, totally without lids, seemed bothered by the patrol car's headlights, and she held up her cape in an attempt to protect them. Next, because she was angered by the patrol car's interference with her nocturnal activities or because the officer appeared to be a likely victim, the witch jumped onto the vehicle and tried to get at him by breaking the windshield. The officer put his automobile in reverse, trying his best to escape her attack. Later, in his official testimony to the bizarre events of the evening, Officer Samaniego said that the witch had flown violently at his windshield, trying to drive her hands through the glass to grab him. Again, he described her as having large black eyes, seemingly with no eyelids. In Santiago Echeria's translation of Officer Samaniego's testimony for Jeff Rentz, the policeman described the woman as having dark brown skin. Her expression was horrible as she tried to get at Samaniego with her claws. Samaniego kept his car in reverse, desperately attempting to call for backup. When his vehicle struck the end of the street, he was so frightened that he covered his eyes to escape the view of his ghastly attacker. When he opened his eyes and saw the horrible being still clawing at his windshield, he fainted due to the high stress. Several minutes later, when two police units arrived together with an ambulance, the officers found Samaniego still unconscious. He was uninjured, perhaps because he had remained in his patrol car, and he regained consciousness as he was being treated by paramedics in the ambulance. During the subsequent investigation of the strange incident, a police officer from Santa Catarina and two more officers from the Regia Force admitted that they had seen the same flying creature that Samaniego had encountered. However, they had sighted the witch in the black dress and cape 3 days earlier but had decided not to come forward with a report of such a flying creature for fear of embarrassment. As the case continued to gain notice and credence from other police officers, a number of residents from Colonia La Playa told television interviewers that they, too, had seen the flying monster in the daylight as well as in the late evening hours. Norma Alicia Herrera, who lives in Colonia La Playa, declared that she and her brother also saw the mysterious flying humanoid in the daytime and that it looked weird. She said that her brother was so stunned by the sight that he was sick for almost a week afterward. Bigfoot with a Cub. Andrew McGrath's recent book, The Beasts of North America, tells a very interesting story about how a man met a Bigfoot with a cub in the Indiana forests in 2018. An unnamed man, along with his girlfriend, went on vacation to a forest camp in Monroe County, Indiana. When evening came, they pitched their tent and then fell asleep, but in the middle of the night, the man suddenly woke up when he heard some clanging sounds outside. According to an eyewitness, it sounded like someone was pulling the door handle of his Nissan car, which was parked nearby. He got angry, thinking that some other tourist had decided to steal his car, and jumped out of the tent. However, he saw no one near the car. The man stood for a while near the car and then decided to return to the tent. He opened the tent curtain to see what was happening outside, and then he waited. He was confident that whoever was there would return. He again heard strange sounds outside and then saw a tall, dark silhouette near the tent. The creature stood still, did not move, and then disappeared into the shadows again. After that, the eyewitness again jumped out of his tent and ran to the car. Suddenly, he froze in place, as he saw in front of him a very large figure, which was walking directly towards him. Until that moment, he did not believe in Bigfoot, but now he understood that this creature was exactly a Sasquatch. In a panic, the man ran back to the tent, dived inside, and zipped up as quickly as possible. He held his breath and heard the creature, stepping heavily, approach the tent. It went to the far corner of the tent, stood over it, grunted, hit the tent with its chest, and growled loudly. I froze in place with horror. This creature was so huge. The eyewitness recalled that I'm sure it was at least 2.5 meters tall and weighed about 450 kilograms. Meanwhile, a second creature appeared in the tent, much smaller than the first. I think it was a teenage Bigfoot and that it was he who played with the handle of my Nissan. He started sniffing the tent right above my head. According to an eyewitness, he clearly saw the silhouettes of both creatures against the background of the tent fabric and through the window. They were clearly visible in the moonlight. The shoulders of an adult Bigfoot were extremely wide, and compared to him, the man felt like a small child. Then it began to make strange sounds, addressing the cub. It sounded like a parental conversation, accompanied by clicks and claps of the tongue. I knew that this creature could easily break my spine with minimal effort, but I decided not to do it. It probably sensed mine horror and that was enough for him. Bizarre encounter. December 11, 1975, 11:30 p.m., Toppenish Ridge, Washington. Other sources give the name Jim Miller, possibly a pseudonym, having dropped off his girlfriend after a party. He turned off the United States 97 and began the familiar journey home along Pump House Road, which runs along the northern slopes of Toppenish Ridge. The gravel road was dark without any street lights. A mile up the road, Bob was surprised to see in his headlights a roan cow and her two calves beelining toward him. The cow was bawling and looking back over its shoulder, apparently to make sure that one of the calves was following. Something had frightened the animals. Bob slowed his truck to avoid hitting them. Moments later, as he neared the top of a small rise, he saw three figures standing on the left side of the road. He wondered if they were travelers in trouble. The boy reduced his speed, ready to help. Suddenly, one of the figures, standing in the ditch on the side of the road, bounded out onto the road in a 15-foot, floating, slow-motion stride to a point just past the center of the road. The figure, apparently a man, was about 7 feet tall. He slowly put his arms above his head. An uncomfortable feeling descended upon Bob. He decided it was best to continue on. The truck approached within several feet of the figure, and Bob saw that the man was extremely thin and wore tight black clothing with white bands at each wrist and ankle. A white trapezoid, as if an insignia, was on his chest, and black boots or similar footwear were on his feet. The man had a very long face and a long, pointy nose. The skin on his face was very white as if it had been covered with flour. The upper lip appeared to be pulled back in a permanent snarl, and fine teeth were visible. The lower lip was either missing or very small. The man's shoulder-length hair was brownish, reddish blonde, and very matted and stringy. The fingers on both of the man's bare hands were long, and the creature grasped something purple in his left hand. The thing had a wire on it, which appeared to run down the creature's arm. Bob noticed that the other two individuals remained close together at the side of the road. They were wearing the same kind of clothing, complete with white markings. Completely frightened, Bob swerved around the figure. As he did, the giant turned sideways, never moving his arms nor changing his expression. Bob tore off up the road and into the darkness. He had the urge to look into the rearview mirror but was too frightened. He drove as fast as he could. A few moments later, an elongated lighted object appeared behind the truck. It blinks on and off several times. Shortly, the inside of his truck and a 10-foot area around the vehicle was flooded with light, as if the dome light had been turned on. The intensity of the illumination masked the instrument panel lights and revealed dead insects stuck to the windshield. Bob noticed a shadow in the seat to his right out of the corner of his eye. He recognized the figure as a close male friend his own age. He recognized the shape of the friend's head and his familiar coat. As Bob drove madly home, a woman's voice spoke in his head, "Drive recklessly because they can't afford to be the cause of your getting hurt." Bob's passenger turned his head and looked at Bob, then leaned forward and looked up at the light pouring in through the windshield. He then leaned back, wiped his eyes, leaned forward as if to stand up, and vanished. The light disappeared, and a sick feeling came over Bob that someone had died. The boy reached home and ran inside to awaken his parents, who could see that he was quite frightened. An interesting fact is that Bob learned the morning after he encountered the giants that a friend who resembled the passenger in his car had died the night of the encounter in a violent shooting. Black-eyed kid. This account of a pair of Becks in Pittsburgh, PA was recently sent to us. Oddly, one of the children doesn't seem to have fully materialized during this encounter. This led the witness to believe he had seen a ghost, but perhaps it's a clue as to the true nature of these beings. My wife and I moved to Pittsburgh, PA in 2001. She had family in the area and she'd always wanted to be close to them. At first, we rented an apartment for a year while we settled into new jobs. Once the year was up and we had decided to stay in the area, we started looking for a house. By 2002, we moved into our own house, a one-story place that we found for a good price. The neighborhood was clean and quiet, and within a couple of months we had met most of the families on the block. It was a great place to live. My wife and I both worked about the same hours, so except for occasional overtime, we usually arrived home around the same time. This strange incident happened to us in September of 2002. It was a weekday around the later part of the month. I got home first and my wife about a half hour after me. We talked for a minute, but my wife wasn't feeling too well, so she went to the bedroom to lay down. I was sitting in the living room, watching some sports. About 15 minutes after my wife had gone to the bedroom, there was a knock at the front door. It was sort of loud and I didn't want it to wake her, so I put my drink and the TV remote down and quickly got up. It was strange because the knocking just kept going, the person wouldn't let up. When I opened the door, there was this kid standing on the step. He was wearing a gray hooded top and his hands were stuck in the pockets. I wondered for a moment how he had been knocking because his hands were in his pockets. I'd never seen this boy in the neighborhood before. He was staring straight at me and his look was rather mean. Before I even said anything, this kid says, "I want to come into your house now." The hair on the back of my neck went up. This kid's tone was so cold. He looked about 10 years old, and this didn't sound right coming from him. I looked at him and realized his eyes were solid black. I felt like I was starting to panic. I don't know why I did it, but I looked beyond him, out to the street. Maybe I was hoping there was someone else out there, I don't know. When I looked back at the boy, I only glanced at his face. I couldn't stand those eyes. Then I glanced down and realized I couldn't really see his feet. I know how strange this sounds, I don't really know how to explain it. It's almost like his legs just faded away. I slammed the door on him and turned around to see my wife rushing into the room. She looked frightened and said to me, "There's a kid knocking on the bedroom window and he has black eyes." I was so stunned I didn't know what to say. I opened the front door again, but there was no one there. I ran outside and went to the corner of the house where our bedroom windows were. Again, there was no one there. There must have been two of those kids, but I simply can't imagine that they were able to get away from the house so quickly. There was something so unnatural about the boy I saw standing on the steps, and I've never understood why I couldn't see his feet. For a long time, I thought that we had seen ghosts. It's only in the past year that we came across stories of the black-eyed children on the internet. We now believe this is what we witnessed. Thankfully, they never returned.